The council. We have a great relationship with all of the people here, Alicia and Jim and so many other people, Ann Finucane. We just want to say thank you to them. I see some very special friends here. Fionnuala Quinlan, the Irish Consul General here in Boston. She was on a maternity leave and she's back, and we want to welcome her back. She does a fantastic job on behalf of her country. Jay Ash, who was just appointed, the Massachusetts Competitive Partnership, a very, very good appointment for a very, very good man who will do an outstanding job, and we wish him much success. I see a distinguished gentleman from the labor movement, probably the most popular labor leader in Greater Boston, and that is Harry Brett, who is the business manager of Local 12. And his motto is, when he meets with a developer, he just says, "You want to go the easy way? You want to go the hard way?" That's Harry Brett. And there's just so many other. Dan Conley, former district attorney here in Suffolk County, is here for the first time, and he's with Mintz Levin, and a very good man, and did an outstanding job, and a very distinguished public servant, and now a very distinguished private citizen. We have a couple of events coming up. I know it's a tight schedule, but if I could just say quickly, on Monday, we have so many politics and eggs events. You know, this past week, the former mayor of New York City spoke, Michael Bloomberg. On Monday, we're going to hear from the new chairman of the Intelligence Committee in Congress, Adam Schiff, will be speaking. We have former Congressman from Maryland, John Delaney, who'll be speaking. On February 15th, our own distinguished governor from the Bay State, Bill Weld, will be speaking. We take a little break, and then we go back to our congressional roundtables, and Andy Custer from the 2nd Congressional District in New Hampshire will be speaking. And then we go back to Politics and Eggs in February again with Congressman Adam Swell from California, who'll be speaking. And then we're going to end the month of February by going back to Washington with a Capital Conversation with Congressman Bill Keating. So it's going to be a very busy time, to say the least. We hope that many of you will join us in Washington for our annual event on May 8th and 9th. It's going to be a fabulous event. We have 5 new members of Congress from New England. You need to get to know them, and they'll all be there speaking at our events, and I think you're going to enjoy it. But today, I think for the purposes of introducing our keynote speaker and somebody who wants to make a little announcement too, and that is Micheal Chamberlain, on behalf of the bank, who's going to say a few words and then introduce our very special friend. So, Micheal.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the members of the New England Council. It's always a pleasure to host you here at Bank of America. And this morning I have the honor of introducing our special guest speaker, the Mayor of Boston, Marty J. Walsh. Sworn into office in 2014 and re-elected in 2018, Mayor Walsh is a lifelong champion of the working people and a proud product of Boston himself. Since taking office, he has made tremendous strides in not only fueling Boston's growth, but doing so in an inclusive way that provides opportunity for everyone to participate in our region's economic success. Often when I'm called upon to introduce a guest speaker, I run through a list of their accomplishments and their priorities. And with Mayor Walsh, it's easy to do that because he has a long list of accomplishments, and his vision and his priorities are clear. But today I want to take a different route and talk for a minute here about what kind of a leader Mayor Walsh is. In short, he's a trusted partner, not only for all of us here at the bank, but across all sectors in business and in neighborhoods throughout the city. He listens, he's respectful of everyone's ideas, he's courteous, he's bright, he's truthful, and we know he sure is passionate. Those are qualities that make Marty Walsh an extraordinary leader, and it helps explain why all of us are here this morning to hear him speak, and why we at the bank are so proud to host him. Mayor Walsh said before his second inauguration that he was not going to host a big party or inaugural ball. Instead, he wanted to use the occasion to raise money for Boston's homeless. And that's the kind of leader Marty Walsh is. And that's how Boston's Way Home Fund became a reality. He set a goal of raising $10 million over 4 years to create 200 units of permanent and supportive housing for Boston's chronically homeless. In his State of the City address this month, the mayor announced that in just 1 year, the fund had raised $5 million, and he called upon all of us to help take it the rest of the way. Bank of America was honored to seed that fund with $250,000 when it was founded in January of last year. And in short order, our region's finest corporate citizens, Liberty Mutual, Partners, and Suffolk, among others, stepped up with major pledges. We share the commitment of the mayor to end homelessness here in Boston in collaboration with Lyndia Downey and the tremendous people that work at Pine Street Inn. And on that note, before I hand it over to the mayor, I'd like to announce that this morning, Bank of America is going to contribute another $750,000 to Boston's Way Home Fund. That brings our total commitment to $1 million, and I just want to say, Mr. Mayor, thank you for your tremendous leadership on an issue that's so important to you and so important to all of us here in this room. And so without further ado, I'd like to call up our mayor, Marty Walsh.
Thank you, Mihal, and I don't know where to start. I had a different start for my speech. Let me start by thanking you for your friendship. Mihal assumed his role right after I assumed this role, and his team here is absolutely incredible, and he's been a great partner. And I want to thank you for your donation today. Last night we did the homeless census count. Lyndia was there, and some other folks were there. A bunch of people were there. And it was probably 8 degrees outside. And we started at City Hall, where we had about 300 volunteers. Rachel Rawlings was there, Peter Katusian was there, there was some city councilors there. And we started walking down from City Hall down to Downtown Crossing. And as we walked down Washington Street towards the Millennium Building, we didn't really see anybody. No one was out. And then we took a left, and we went down the stations. We started to see people. We started to talk to them. Saw a kid, that person that's a heroin addict, sitting downstairs at Downtown Crossing Station with just a very light jacket on, and telling me that he hasn't used in a while because he's taken the Vivitrol shot. And we were able to try and convince him to go into shelter. We walked further down Sumner Street, and we saw a couple, a girl and a boy, a guy and a woman, probably in their 30s, sleeping in a doorway under blankets. They didn't want to go in. They wanted to stay out in the street, and trying to convince them on why they should go in. And then Pine Street was out in the street, and Pine Street was able to make sure all night long they're checking these folks that wouldn't come in. Everyone has a story. The folks that were on the street last night, when you think about who they are and what they're all about, it's our obligation as human beings to go out and do what we should do to try and get these folks off the street. Not everyone's going to come off the street. Not everyone wants to come off the street. But when they're ready to come off the street, we need to make sure that there's a place for them to go when they want to come off the street. And I just want to thank Mihal because when we decided this fund last year, he was the first one in. Bank of America was the first one in. And then other companies fell in line, and we're still short of our goal of $10 million, but we're not short of what we're doing as far as moving forward. I said this before, when Long Island Bridge closed, it was a tough day for me to figure out what we're going to do to move forward. We sheltered homeless people prior to that. No offense to the city, I'm not criticizing the city or anyone, but we sheltered people. And I remember Linda and Amy coming in my office when I was a state rep, and they would talk about homelessness, and at the state level we try and push and push and push. And we realized that we're not doing it quite the way we should be doing it, so we kind of threw out the playbook and started over. And we had people come in my office, and we started talking about how do we deal with homelessness, because what we were doing is picking them up at the end of the night, put them on a bus, take them out to Long Island, put them out there, let them have a warm meal, a place to sleep, and in the morning they'd go on a bus, and we'd bring them back and drop them off somewhere in town. And when I was a state rep, sometimes they'd drop them off at JFK, UMass, and people in my area would go crazy. And I'd be like, well, you can't drop them off there. You got to put them somewhere else. And they put them on the South End, and people go crazy. And then they'd say downtown Crossing, and people go crazy. And what we're doing is just literally warehousing people. That's what we're doing. But what we started to do in 2014 is really think about a plan. And from that day till today, we've housed over 1,600 people. That's 4,000 years of homelessness that are people living in homes. But there are still more people out in the streets. So Boston's Way Home Fund is a fund that is privately raised to build supportive housing, 200 units, which we're going to do with Pine Street Inn. And when I'm done with the $10 million, I'm going to raise more money somewhere else because we have to do this. It's our obligation. It's not about hiding people in a tent. It's not about hiding people in a building. It's about making sure they get a chance to get on their feet. So any company that's here today that is interested and you want to get involved in some space, get involved in this space. Because I can't think of a better investment than making an investment in somebody that last night was living on the streets of Boston, sleeping under a cotton, under 5 blankets, with about 7 jackets on, 10 pairs of socks, shivering, freezing cold, and allowing that same person the opportunity and the dignity to be able to walk into their home and turn the heat up if they want or turn the heat down if they want, sleep in a warm bed, with blankets, clean sheets, clean bathrooms, and food in the kitchen. So that's what this is all about, and that's what this donation today helps us towards. So thank you, Mihal. Thank you, Bank of America. Thank you, everyone here. Thank you, Pine Street, as well, and all the other organizations. And I'll shut you out in a minute. I want to thank the New England Council. I want to thank Jim Brett. You know, I've known Jim pretty much my whole life. He was, when I was growing up, a young boy. He was a state representative. You know, one thing about Jim that I have to announce today that I feel really bad for him, that he's never been quite recognized for all the work he's done. So tonight, in case you don't know, the Boston Police Foundation is giving him the Civilian Award. So if anyone, just, you know, congratulations on that award, Jim. Truly appreciate it. You know, Father Tom's back there from St. Anthony's. We walked by St. Anthony's last night. Father Tom St. Anthony's does some incredible work as well with homelessness and with folks and with people. Last night I was walking around. Let me just tell you one quick story. I'm completely off script, but when I was a kid growing up, we'd go in town. My mother would go shopping. We'd go down to downtown Crossing. We'd go to Jordan Marshall, Filene's, and everyone that lives in Boston or around Boston. You did the same thing with your parents or with your mother or father. And every time we went in town, we'd have to stop at St. Anthony's. Every single time. We'd light a candle, say a prayer, and that was what we did. There was a gentleman that used to sit on the stoop in front of St. Anthony's. I must have been, I don't know how old I was, maybe 10, 11 years old. He was homeless, and he sat there every single day. Every time I went in town, he was there. He had dark hair. He had these kind of bulging eyes because of alcohol, and he was there and doing things. And you think about how life goes and opportunities. And I don't know what this man had an opportunity for, but I was at a meeting one night, an AA meeting one night, and a guy got up at the podium and he started talking, and he's talking about how he's homeless for years in the streets of Boston, and about how his life gets sober and his life turned around. He has a job today, an apartment, all this stuff, talking. And I went over to him, and I went up to him. I said, God, you look familiar. And I said, by any chance, and I was, at the time, I was in my 30s, is there any chance you used to kind of hang out at St. Anthony's Shrine? He goes, yeah, the second door is my stoop. And you think about, he was on the streets for about 35 years in Boston. So when you think about the opportunity for entry into recovery and help, it is people like Father Tom, it's people like Pine Street, and again, some of the great organizations in here, so thank you. We're in interesting times in Boston, not in our city. I'm going to talk about how great the city's going in a minute, but with the federal government, with the shutdown. that was closed last month. You know, I want you to think about this and consider the contrast for a moment. On one hand, we're here this morning, the public sector, the private sector, nonprofit sector, working together to end homelessness and be able to talk about what we're doing and the gains that we're making. On the other hand, the conversations that are in Washington is stuck on campaign rhetoric about building a wall. It's all about building a wall and not moving our country forward. The shutdown that just ended lasted 35 days. It was the longest, as you know, on record. It cost the American economy $11 billion in GDP, according to the Congressional Budget Office. We felt it here in Boston. 11,000 federal employees work in the city. 2,000 work for agencies that were closed. Many of the contract workers, including security guards, custodians, and food service as well. That's on top of the 2,000 employees. Thousands of families, hundreds of thousands of families across the country didn't get a paycheck. They were struggling to pay their rent, their mortgages, their bills, experiencing stress, uncertainty. But it's pretty scary when you think about where we were. The shutdown in our city hit us on the tourism side with the closing of JFK Library, which opened yesterday, the USS Constitution, Bunker Hill Monument, where the barrels weren't being emptied and trash was flowing out. All of those sites that we have in the city of Boston that were affected by this shutdown. It affected our city departments as we worked to prepare for the impacts and make plans. Dave Sweeney, my chief of staff, is here, and we had a conversation when I was in Washington saying that we were going to have a meeting on this Monday, to talk about the impacts of the shutdown. We were talking about creating some sort of food pantry for the people that work at TSA, but we took it one step further. We have about 13,000 people that have housing vouchers in the city of Boston. Those vouchers weren't going to be paid. So we were thinking, what do we do? Because landlords aren't going to be letting people stay in their homes if they can't pay. What do we do? Is there an opportunity? Can we access some funds in the city of Boston? Can we access our rainy day fund? Can we do this to pay that? Food stamps, the bills weren't going to be paid. They weren't going to be renewed, so the ATM machine was empty, and there was no opportunity for an investment, a deposit. So if people that were dependent upon food stamps and food programs, they weren't happening. Contracts in our schools and other places, they were going to not be paid as well, and we were going to have to decide, do we just end these programs and let them go by the wayside, or what do we do? These are the conversations that we were beginning to have if this went on for one more week. It didn't go on for one more week. It ended. But it's not over. Because week one is today. Week one was, I think, is now. Week two is in 2 more weeks. And week 4 means another shutdown. In 7 weeks or 6 weeks from today, those conversations that we're going to have with Dave Sweeney are going to have to happen. And what are we going to do? There are millions and millions and millions and millions of Americans all over the United States of America that are affected by this shutdown. Now, maybe most of us in this room aren't affected. My direct deposit was in my bank. Everything that I had was working. I was watching on TV, seeing what was going on. But there are people that are affected by it. The people that I saw last night on the streets of Boston that don't have the same means that all of us have are affected by this shutdown. Washington and the lack of ability to be able to come up with an agreement is failing all of us. It's failing cities all across America. The opportunity, what these conversations have been happening over the last couple of years has been causing problems, but the opportunity costs have been growing for 2 years. We are paying, the American people are paying for what's not moving forward in America. Not just our international relations, but here in America. The good news is, I was down in Washington last week in the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We had a conference. I came away feeling pretty good because we have a bipartisan group of mayors in Washington. Quite honestly, I'm sitting in meetings with mayors. I don't even know if they're Democrats or Republicans because that's not the question we asked each other. Because the challenges that we're facing are the same challenges that we all face. We're facing challenges on housing. We're facing challenges on economic opportunities. We're facing challenges on inequality. We're facing challenges on poverty. We're facing challenges on moving our city forward. What the conference focused on and what we focused on last week was infrastructure, housing, climate change, inequality, because those issues affect the city of Boston, and those issues affect other cities across America. And right now in Washington, there isn't a plan to deal with any of them. When Jim has his breakfast, politics and eggs, and the Congress people stand here, they can't stand here and tell you there's a policy in housing because there isn't one. They can't stand here and tell you there's a policy in infrastructure because there isn't one. They can't tell you there's a policy on the climate because there isn't one. We're better than that as a country. And our delegations across the country are better than that as well. And what we're trying to do as a conference is push some of the federal folks to start focusing on what's important. I chaired a panel on job training for people in recovery, and we had mayors there, and we talked about the elderly, and we talked about how do we move our economy forward. And right now, in this time in our country, it's very important that you think about local leaders and how local leaders are leading and moving us forward, because we need to continue to move us forward. There were very many positive conversations, a lot of great shared ideas. We listened and we learned from each other, best practices, and that is why I think today that cities are leading in the United States of America. And that's why I think we need to continue to lead. And Boston is one of those leaders in the United States of America. I said it at my State of the City the other day, but it's true. If you ask any city in America and you say, give me 4 cities that you want to kind of be, Boston's one of the ones they're going to point to. Why? Because of the people in this room. Why? Because of our political atmosphere. Why? Because we're making investments, historic investments in places that haven't been made before. Why? Because our congressional delegation, quite honestly, is probably one of the most effective, powerful delegations we have right now that we've had since, I said this not too long ago, the days of Tip O'Neill and Ted Kennedy and Joe Moakley. With the folks that are in office, we have an opportunity to move not just Massachusetts forward, but move our country forward. We're working, to bring you back to Boston, I just want to give you a few stats. In Boston, one of the things that we're looking, the biggest challenges we have, a couple, is housing. The final numbers for 2018 are in. It's one of the biggest years we've ever had in housing. We've permitted over 4,200 units of new homes in the city of Boston. That brings the total of new homes built under our housing plan in the last 5 years to 29,000 new units of housing in the city of Boston. We're ahead of pace. Our goal is we took a goal last year, and we raised that goal from 53,000 to 69,000 units of new housing. Why? Because many of the employees in this room, when you hire people, they're millennials, they're from other places, they want to live in Boston, and we want to make sure that we give them the opportunity to stay in our city. We also want to make sure that we give an opportunity for the people that grew up in our city and live in our city to stay in our city and not price them out of our city. So we have to increase the housing stock so that you can continue to recruit great talent to our city, and we can continue to make sure they have the opportunity to live in Boston. We also are working to create more affordable housing. In Boston, our citywide ratio is 1 in 5 income-restricted units. It's the highest in the United States of America, which means that poor people have an opportunity to live in the city of Boston. Economic development. Last year, we saw $6.9 billion worth of new approvals last year. Since I've taken office, we've approved over $28 billion of investment, 56 million square feet of new construction. It's the biggest building boom in the city of Boston's history. And over $12 billion right now, today, this morning when we woke up, is under construction in our city. We have broken new grounds and new investments to make sure that we share opportunities more widely. We've mentioned affordable housing, but we're using development to drive that. We sat down, we raised the inclusionary development, and we sat down. We didn't tell developers what's going to happen. We brought them to the table and said, we need to increase the numbers so we can get more people and build more housing in Boston. And they didn't say no. They said, let's do it. We sat down with the business community again with the Community Preservation Act to put a 1% assessment tax, basically, on real estate. In 2001, they said, no, we don't want it, and put a lot of money into it. In 2016, we sat down and said, how do we make it happen? We need the money, the investments. And people did it by having dialogues and conversations. We're investing in Winthrop Square. From Winthrop Square Garage, the proceeds of Winthrop Square, we're investing $28 million in Boston Common. We're investing $28 million in Franklin Park. We're investing in public housing throughout the entire city of Boston to make sure that this is one-time payment, that we're making investments in our public assets so people can see the benefits of what we're doing here in the city. Last year, we worked with nonprofit groups. We got over 3,900 Boston residents into living wage jobs, again, working with the business community, making sure that we're working together to move us forward as an economy and as a city. We're working with companies like Amazon. Amazon's coming down the seaport, and they're going to be putting in a couple thousand jobs, and we're working with them to make sure that the funds from the job training on that project are going to go into making sure that people get trained so they get good paying jobs, and we're going to be working with a lot of you here. Our city is safer today. Last year, crime went down for the 5th straight year in a row. Total drop over 5 years, 25% drop in violent crime. Our arrests are down by 25% as well. We are locking fewer people up because we're working differently. Dan Conley said, I don't see Dan, but I know Dan's here. We worked with Dan's office when he was the DA to have different philosophies. Dan was working what he was doing in his office. We were working in our office, coming together saying, okay, let's try and put each other out of business here. We're going to hopefully continue that relationship with Rachel Rawlings. I know we will. We're going to keep that relationship going, but it's important to understand that the job isn't just to arrest and prosecute. The job is actually to try and help get people back on their feet. We're making progress on climate change. We have a plan for a resilient harbor plan. You saw it. I talked about it at the Chamber of Commerce, about building a space throughout the whole city of Boston to make sure as sea level rises, we're protecting our shoreline. We're also connecting people to the waterfront by creating green space on where that is, something that is really important. But we're still waiting for a federal infrastructure plan. We're still making record investments in our streets, in sidewalks and bridges, but we need that help. Financially, we're a strong city. For 5 consecutive years, we have a AAA bond rating. I can't stress that enough because the importance of that is in a bad economy, by having a strong bond ability helps the city of Boston. We're mandated by the state to have a fully funded pension liability by the year 2040. Right now, Boston's on pace to have that fund fully funded by 2025, far ahead of anyone else in the Commonwealth, maybe even in the country. Again, puts Boston in a very strong position for the future. Our unemployment rates for December are 2.3%, the lowest ever recorded. So I think you get the message. Inside City Hall, we're working to continue diversifying the workforce, continue to make sure that we're working to have better policies in City Hall, to make sure that women and people of color and veterans have access to city contracts. We changed that a couple of years ago. Where veterans weren't part of the equation there, and it was women, people of color, and we put veterans on there to make sure that veterans that fight for our country and come home, they have an opportunity to get onto some of these city contracts as well. We're working to make sure that we have a more inclusive city. Yesterday, I signed an executive order promoting racial equity in city agencies. It's not about you, it's about internally. Because if I stand up here and ask you to diversify your boards and create opportunities and pay equal pay, which I shouldn't have to do anymore, making sure that women have access to your boards, they shouldn't have to do that anymore, making sure that you look at promoting people of color within your organizations, I shouldn't have to do that anymore. But the fact that we have to do it with internally first, because I can't say to you what I'd like to see happen in our city to make sure we create opportunities for everybody. Our focus on legislation, we filed a bill regarding liquor licenses, particularly in our neighborhoods for small businesses to create opportunities in equity opportunity in our neighborhoods. And working with our Main Street programs to strengthen our Main Street programs, to strengthen our small businesses. Again, many of you support our Main Street programs. Bank of America is one of the main sponsors. We want to make sure that we continue to build up equity in our communities. We're working on education, ride sharing. I'm going to come back to education in a second. Ride sharing. We had a conversation, you saw the report came out yesterday about climate, and in there's a $5 proposed fee to, I think it's like I don't know what it's called. I don't know how it got in there, but it got in there. I'm not supportive of that. I'm not supportive of that today. I don't know how it works. I don't know how it works in England, but I'm not supportive today. But what I am supportive is filing legislation, which we did, file legislation that Uber and Lyft, if they're going to drive people around with one person in the car all day long and jam up the streets, that ride should cost more than car sharing. And we're going to add $1 to that ride so that that money will go back into opportunities to put more money into the environment. Education. You've heard this conversation a million times. Mayor Menino stood at this podium and talked about education, the importance of education. Ray Flynn stood at this podium and talked about the importance of education. I'm sure Kevin White stood at this podium and talked about the importance of education. We have to pass legislation at the State House that works for everybody. We can't pass legislation that's floating around right now at the State House that does not benefit the city of Boston, does not benefit other cities and towns across Massachusetts. Laura Perella, interim superintendent, is here. There was a story in the paper the other day that talked about Boston being a rich city with plenty of money. We're doing well, no question about it. But in the next 2 years, if we don't get a major education funding shift, we'll be paying the Commonwealth for education. In the next 2 years, next 3 years, next 4 years, next 5 years, there's a good chance that there's going to be a downturn in the economy. It happens. When I was a state rep, it happened 3 times. When Jim Brett was a state rep, it happened a bunch of times. When Bill Weld was the governor, he came in a tough economy and ended in a great economy, and throughout, he had bumps through there. The legislation that I'm supporting and I'm part of benefits every single city and town across Massachusetts. It's time for my friends at the State House, including the governor, to look at the legislation and work together to pass legislation, not some person sitting in the back room saying, well, this is how we're going to do it, that's how we're going to do it. Listen to the cities and towns that are dealing with it every single day. Listen to the challenges that we have. Listen to our budget people, because at the end of the day, we're the ones who do the work. The bill that I'm supporting and that's been filed lifts every single city and town in Massachusetts up. It doesn't pit Boston versus someplace else, Lowell versus someplace else. It doesn't pit suburban versus urban. It doesn't pit white kids versus black kids. It's a piece of legislation that is really important called the Promise Act. We need to work together collectively and make sure that this happens, because it is about the future of our kids. We have 57,000 kids in the Boston Public Schools. Many of you are involved in it. Just think about the growth in the city of Boston in the last 5 years. Think about the headquarter companies that have moved into our city. Think about your own companies that have expanded. Think about what's happened in our universities and our hospitals. Think about what's happening in our city. We need to make sure that the kids that go to our schools have opportunities in the future. What we're doing today is building a strong Boston for tomorrow, is laying down the foundation to make sure that when we're not here anymore, when I'm not the mayor anymore and other people aren't here, we have a strong foundation for our city to move our city forward. The way that happens through education, the way that happens is not being politicizing education, but actually sitting down and listening to other people's ideas. And that's what we have to do when it comes to our schools. I want to end by thanking the business community. I want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank you for your partnership. You have all proven your commitment and dedication to Boston, and those of you that are in the greater Boston area, I want to thank you for that. I want to thank anyone here today who's helped us with Boston's Way Home Fund, or Principal for a Day program, or former Boston leaders, business leaders like Bob Gallery, who retired and came back to chair the Boston Public Library Board, and has done an amazing job of putting the Boston Public Library on what I want it to be, the greatest library in the country. I want to thank the nonprofits that are here today. I want to thank the lobbyists that lobby for companies at City Hall and the State House. I want to thank the energy companies. I want to thank all of you that are here today, because truly it takes all of us. I want to thank the hospitality industry for what you do in our city, because it's important for us to thank everybody. If we're going to continue to meet the challenges of the 21st century and what we've seen so far, it's going to take all of us working together. I want to thank you all, and I also want to thank Jim Brett for his leadership here at the New England Council. He has certainly kept the conversation at the forefront, a bipartisan conversation at the forefront, not getting caught up in the politics of it all. And I want to thank the New England Council for doing something really important for our city, for elevating these conversations that we have to have. And now I'll take a few questions if you have any.
Quickly introduce a couple of people. I see Jack Hart. I think he's sneaking out, but former State Senator Jack Hart, who's now with Nelson Mullin, but a very important guest, Father John Curry.
Oh yeah, Father Curry. Sorry, Father. I saw you there.
Yeah. You got to light a couple of candles at St. Anthony's again. Father Curry is the pastor at St. Peter's Parish in Dorchester, the pastor of Holy Family Parish in Dorchester, and pastor of St. Patrick's Parish in Roxbury, and former pastor of Blessed Mother Teresa of Calcutta, which is the St. Margaret's Parish, which is the home parish of guest speaker here this morning. And I just want to acknowledge him.
Grew up in Dorchester too.
St. Mark's and in Dorchester. And I see the fire commissioners here, Joe Finn. Someone asked about, are we overcrowded here? It's getting, Commissioner, are we overcrowded? I think he's still here.
Yeah, he's over there. To the right.
Are we all right, Commissioner? I'll say. I'm trying to think of. And the mayor alluded to homelessness as an important issue. It's part of his DNA, and he will be recognized with a very significant award himself later this spring, Healthcare for the Homeless, with the Dr. Jim O'Connell Award, which is not given out that often, and it's a prestigious award from a very distinguished organization that works with Pine Street, shoulder to shoulder with the mayor, working on behalf of the homeless here. To receive that award is quite a significant accomplishment on behalf of all his advocacy over the years. So, well done, Mr. Mayor. Before I ask you a question, I just want to.
Hey, you want the microphone?
When you go to St. Anthony's and you light those candles, you do put something in the box, right? I mean, you just don't walk out, because that's part of the.
Yeah,
gig,
it's all right. I know all about it.
All right, you just don't want to walk in like the candle.
I have an Irish mother. Don't forget
Okay,
that.
All right. Okay. If I could just ask the first question, and
Yeah.
that would be, you talked about the state of the city, addressed about a road trip with the governor.
Yeah.
Going to Washington. Here, a Republican governor, Democratic mayor. Any update on when you think you'll be going down? And then what is your agenda when you go down there?
Yeah, no update on it yet, because when I announced it, when we talked about it and announced that the government was shut down, last week I was in Washington for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I believe the governor's going down for the Governors Association meeting next week, and we're gonna reach out and talk to some other mayors too, put a coalition of people down and go down to Washington and start to lobby. You know, lobbying, as you know, most of you should know, if you're lobbying in D.C. right now, there's nothing to lobby. Everything's shut down. There's no agenda, no plan. The committees are just being set up. There's no bills. There's no plans really as far as moving forward. They're just finalizing them. So I would suggest sometime late spring, early summer, we go down there, because that's when we'll see the committees up and running. Hopefully the government won't be shut down, and we'll be seeing some legislation moving through the process.
Questions for the mayor?
Yes. Paul.
Paul?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. Mihal outlined such a great list of your qualities as a leader, and you've clearly been a master at getting out your message and providing a vision for the city of Boston And you talked about this bipartisan group of mayors, which is very reassuring and I think really helpful to the cause. I wonder if I could coax you into giving us any nuggets that would come from someone as accomplished as you are as we look ahead to the next 2 years and think about electing a president in 2020. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess the bipartisan stuff's out the window right now, Gov. No. You know, I think that it's going to be interesting, obviously. I think in the election, you know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the Republicans went through the same thing where there was, you know, 7 or 8 or 9 people running for president. Actually, I think there was 17 at one point. I think that there's going to be a wide range of options to choose from and what we want to see in a leader. You know, the people running, obviously, I know a lot of them, certainly Senator Warren know her very well, our senator here in Massachusetts. Senator Harris, had a chance to meet Senator Harris, and you know, tough person. I mean, when I say tough, tough and fair. You know, Vice President Biden hasn't announced yet, but he's considering it. Mayor Pete from South Bend, Indiana is in the race. We have some other folks that, you know, I know and I don't know them that well. So I just think that, you know, as the next year, I don't think it'll be 2 years. I think the next 8 months will be really interesting on the Democratic side to see if who can emerge and who can keep the momentum moving forward. I think with the media and with social media, it changes the dynamics of a presidential election because every little thing becomes a big story on whether it's a Twitter feed or a story. So I just think we have to kind of ride through this and see what's moving forward. I feel I like a lot of the candidates running for president, and I certainly could live with any of them. I think the interesting thing will be, is there going to be a Republican that's going to challenge Donald Trump on the Republican side? And I think that, you know, I think over the course of the next 8 months, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for all of us as Americans to really think about what direction we want the country to go in. And I think that that's going to be really important. That I hope that this presidential election is about the issues and not personalities. I hope that this presidential election is about vision for the future of the country and not about whatever they talk about. That's really what we need right now in this time in this country. Not just, for me personally, I think we need a change. It's not just about a change. It's about a change with vision, not just a change with a slogan.
Other questions? Kate, do you have the mic? Somebody? Okay. Give it to Ronnie. I have a feeling it might involve immigration.
Ronnie Miller from the Irish International Immigrant Centre. Mayor, thanks so much for all of your leadership and how much you genuinely care for all residents in the city of Boston. And another area where you've really shown tremendous leadership is with immigration and immigrants. And I'd love you to speak just a bit about, you know, how you see the value and the role of immigrants in the city of Boston.
Yeah, thank you, Ronnie. Immigrants, the role and value of immigrants across the United States of America are important. When Trump did the ban, I was down in Washington not too long after that with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And Mayor Tate from Anaheim, California, a Republican, was very concerned about the ban on immigration because a lot of his service workers are immigrants. The mayor from Mesa, Arizona, is a Republican, was very concerned about the ban on immigrants. And I think that, let me just back up. I think the country needs immigration reform. We have 13 million immigrants in America that we know of that are undocumented. And we have to figure out what to do with the 13 million people. And we have to create opportunities for pathways to citizenship. Those people that are living legally and working and doing what they're doing, we have to create pathways for citizenship. We also have to figure out what do we do with new immigrants coming into the country. Because America needs immigrants because we have more jobs than people. And we also have to look at our college universities where we're educating. People are coming from other parts of the world to get educated in Boston. When they get educated, we're saying you have to go home now. So we're losing bright people that are coming into this country to be educated. There are companies, tech companies and biotech companies and other companies that would love to bring people from India and China to work here in the United States of America but the work visa is not long enough. We need to think about, as a country, who we are and stop getting into the whole conversation that immigrants are bad and they're criminals. It's not about that. It's about how do we truly have immigration reform. And that has not come up once throughout this whole conversation about border security and border walls and all this other stuff. You can build all the security you want. You can build all the walls you want. But we still need to deal with immigration as a country and what's our policy on that. And there's many different levels of immigration, I think, that we have to do. But immigrants add a big value. In Boston, Massachusetts, we have about 700,000 people that live in our city. 28% of them were born in another country. 48% of them are first generation like I am, like Jim Brett is, like a lot of you in this room are. I just went through some numbers. Biggest building boom in the history of the city of Boston. Building more housing than any period history of our city. AAA bond rating, paying down pension liability, 25% reduction in crime, 25% reduction in arrests. Boston's doing pretty good. And 28% of the people who live in our city were born somewhere else. So when you think about it, there's an opportunity to take advantage of immigration as a positive.
Other questions for the mayor? We're going to get the mic to you.
Good morning, Mayor. Rashad Martin, Constitution Museum and a Boston public school parent. I think you just share for folks about sort of your thoughts about the current state of Chapter 70 funding and really your thoughts about how it really should work and how that would help, the city, and also just maybe some thoughts on the true either challenge of cost of what it would take to to improve the infrastructure of the BPS, around the city, because we have so many old school buildings.
That's a big question. The funding piece, the Chapter 70 is a formula that is very complicated, and quite honestly, I wouldn't be able to sit here and tell you the whole formula complication, because it takes weights of students, it takes the value of a city, how much a city has in investments, and how rich they are, and how poor they are. But I know today it doesn't work. Because I know today that if you look at a graph and you look at the investments in Boston in the last 10 years of education funding, you will see that graph decline. It's like going downhill really fast. And within 2 years, and we see the charter school reimbursement rate, which used to be fully funded by the state up until 2013, that every single dollar for charter schools was funded came through the state budget appropriation. And since that time, that number for cities and towns has gone down, which means that our cost to fully fund charter schools has gone up. So we are paying in Boston, I think this year we're going to pay $19 million out of our fund to fully fund charter schools, when that obligation really depends, it should have been on the state. The reason why it changed, I was a rep at the time when it happened, is that the economy was going down and they were shifting money around, so they shifted some of the burden over to cities and towns. Now Boston, a city like Boston can afford to pay that. But what's happened for a short period of time, but over time, that cost is going to continue to grow. So now that's where we're paying money back. So we're going to have lower income from Chapter 70, a greater charter school reimbursement number, and that's where we're going to end up paying the state for education funding, because ultimately we won't be getting any education, very little education money from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because the way the formula is written. Our formula that we've done in the past, we've filed legislation that has taken care of Boston, or taking care of several cities and towns around Boston. What the Promise Act does, it fully funds education. When I say fully fund, it gives Boston more money and other cities and towns more money, and it lifts all boats. It's about a $1.2 billion investment over a 7-year period. So it's an investment in education at the state level, and we need to make that investment. Our schools, 125 school buildings, 2/3 of them were built prior to World War II. So we're making investments. We've already made $300 million investments in new school buildings in Boston, and whether it's a new construction or retrofit or what have you. And we have another about $800 million that we're going to do over the next couple of years. We're building Boston Arts Academy right now. We're building the Josiah Quincy School, next one out of the box. But let me just say about education, and this is where I'll get in trouble here. It's frustrating that every story you read is about how bad the schools are, how convoluted they are. We have a formula that the money follows the child. When you read in the paper in the next couple of weeks, it's not the paper's fault, I'm just saying, when you read in the paper the next couple of weeks, there might be a story today, I'm not sure, that X school got underfunded. It didn't get underfunded. What happened was the population of kids they had there last year was higher than the population of kids that is projected to go there next year. The money follows the student. So I would ask you to ask that question to a school when somebody says to you, oh, they're underfunded, X school. Well, what was your population last year? My population last year was 400. What's your population this year? 350. Well, you lost 50 kids. What business model that keeps that model going from year to year if it doesn't happen? BC High has a budget. Fawn Pond has a budget. Those are two private schools, one for boys and one for girls. If their number is whatever it is to run, $13 million to run the school, and let's say 1,000 kids to run the $13 million, in the next year they get 900 kids, and they've lost $1.5 million in revenue, they still don't fund the school at $13 million. They have to make adjustments. So that's some of the stuff that we're trying to get out there. There's a lot of complications in our school system. On a positive note, we have more level 1 and level 2 schools right now in Boston than any other period in the history of our city. If you go into our most underperforming school in the city of Boston today, I'm not sure what it is, but you go into that school, you walk in the front door and you walk around that classroom, you're seeing learning going on. You're seeing incredible teachers, you're seeing incredible opportunities. It's just a matter of making sure that that process is through every classroom and every leader in the district. And that's what we're working on, is trying to continue those movements forward. It's complicated. 57,000 kids. I think the number is 87% of our kids that go to our school districts are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Think about that for a minute. 57,000 kids, 87% are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Think about the challenges that those kids might have with poverty, with family stress, concerned about things. Think about that. That's some of the things that we have. When we look at these other school districts, they don't have 80s, they don't even have 13% free and reduced lunch. So it's important for us that as we think about these young people, we are creating opportunities for these young people to be the first in their families to graduate high school, maybe go to college, get a job, have an opportunity. That's what we're facing when we think of public education. And I think that we're going to continue to make the investments. And we've made record investments every year since I've been mayor. In 2014, we made a record investment. 2015, 16, 17, 18, we've made record investments. And right now, we're in the midst of a budget and a contract negotiation. So we're in this sticky place this year in the budget. But the process started last week, and it doesn't end until June. So there's a long time to figure out as we move forward what the investments will be. I guarantee there'll be more investment in schools again this year than last year. Is there a question?
Yes, ma'am. Just wait for the mic and maybe one further question.
Hello, I'm Rekha Kamath from Dassault System and a recent Boston Business Journal 40 under 40 honoree.
Congratulations.
Thank you. When we look at workplace of the future and workforce of the future, what in your view would be the role of women, especially women in technology? And how do you see the landscape here in Boston towards achieving parity in that aspect?
Well, I think women in technology in Boston, particularly around startups, are outpacing men for venture capital funding on the East Coast, actually in the country. That's one area where I think that we're making great gains. We have a women's workforce council in the city of Boston that we do work on. We're working right now to train women in salary negotiations workshops. We're working with the Women's Workforce Council. We're working with Evelyn Murphy and Kathy Menahan, who chair our Workforce Council. Many women in this room are part of that, that are working to make sure that we're taking data from companies. Many of the companies in this room are giving us data anonymously. We're analyzing the data. We're able to see where the pay gaps are. One part of that didn't work, we didn't have the information for women of color last time we did this, but we're asking for that information this time. So, I think women are the future workforce of the country. I mean, let me just throw a couple more numbers at you. 52% of the households in the city of Boston led by women, single women, outpacing men. I think that it's vital for our economy and vital for the future of Boston to continue to push the efforts of of not just equal pay. I mean, I said this when I first became mayor. I mean, I don't know how many pieces of legislation I voted on for equal pay. Jim voted on a ton for equal pay. Jackie Howe voted on a ton for equal pay. It's time to stop talking about legislation for equal pay and actually acting on it and doing something about it. And I think that we've seen some gains, incremental gains. I think in some cases we've seen better gains than others. But the women entrepreneurs, women in technology, women in every single workforce across the Commonwealth and across the city is very important.
Thank you.
One final question for the mayor. Carol McKee,
Good morning. With all the new jobs and housing coming into Boston, and as a former Seaport resident, what are you doing about the traffic issue?
Nothing.
that's it. No more softball questions.
No, it's a great question. I think one of the things we're filing legislation on the on congestion on the ride sharing companies. I got my license. I said this story the other day. I got my license back when I was 17, 35 years ago. When I drove in town on the Southeast Expressway, it was backed up. I'm bumper to bumper, 35 years ago. When I grew up on Taft Street in Dorchester, and when I wanted to park my car, I had to park it on Victoria Street and Mayfield Street, which is 2 streets away. Traffic's not new. I think what we have to think about are how do we make these investments in other modes of transportation as far as moving forward. The governor is making $8 billion investment in public transportation. Our MBTA, and I might get in trouble for this again, our MBTA is reliable most days, meaning there's some delays, but there's delays if you drive in town. We have to continue to build and make investments in our public transportation system. We have to continue to make investments in alternative modes of transportation like bicycling and walking. We have to get people out of their cars. We have to get people walking into town, walking around town. Transportation is not going to be solved easy. Autonomous vehicles might help us down the road. Electric vehicles might help us down the road. Ride sharing might help us down the road. But it's a complicated, very complicated process. So in the city of Boston, we have a plan. Gina Fandarker, our transportation commissioner, is here. But we have a plan called Go Boston 2030, where we're looking at, in some areas of the city of Boston, laying out better streetscape, better street pathways. I think the biggest thing, though, is trying to encourage people to take public transportation. That's the biggest thing I can say and do. I mean, I can't tell people not to drive in. I'm not a real big fan of this congestion tax that like I said, they talk about England driving in. I don't even know how that would work. But I do think that traffic is something that's here, and it's not going to be solved by the mayor of Boston. It's not going to be solved by the governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It has to be solved by all of us. It has to be almost a mindset change on how we decide to do transportation. 10 years ago in Boston, if you were working in the Back Bay area and you wanted to go to downtown Boston, downtown Crossing, 10 years ago, you would drive. You would get in your car, you drive down Boylston, down Charles, up Beacon, down to Tremont, and you'd park in a garage somewhere. 10 years later, if you look at the systems and the patterns of people, a lot more people are walking. We need to get more people thinking different types of mobile transportation as far as walking and getting around the city of Boston. That's a difficult. I know I didn't answer the question the way you want me to. It's a complicated question. But Gina Fandarker can give you all the stats and everything else. If you want it, she'll tell you. She'll make it sound good. She'll dress up what I just said.
Well, with that, we just want to thank the mayor, not only for just being here, but he is so accessible, so approachable, so visible in all parts of the communities of Boston. And as he just said, people talk about great cities and doing great things. You got to admit that Boston is in the top, 2, 3 in the
Who's 1 and 2?
I happen to represent New England. Be very careful. The cities in New England are doing very, very well, too. But obviously, we're very proud of who he is and what he has done. But more importantly, I always said that the most the unique quality about this mayor that we have, he's he's an outstanding CEO, and the city is obviously really being run very efficiently, very effectively, and he streamlines all of the process and regulations and all that. But the most important quality I think that he has is he has this compassion for the underdog. That to me is singled him out from many other people, that he is passionate about the homeless. He's passionate about people who have a drug addiction, an alcohol problem. The very few times that I do call the mayor, it may be on a case of a young person or a middle-aged person who's having a difficulty struggling with life. And boy, does he light up and say, you know, how do I get a hold of this person? I want to be able to reach out and help that person. There aren't many people who want to do that today. There are no votes, there's no money, contributions. He just thinks that everyone should have an equal opportunity to live a very comfortable life. And he gets his juices flowing when he meets somebody who's struggling. Not somebody who's doing well, and he says, God bless them. It's the person who's struggling that he wants to spend more time with. And I've watched him over the years do that. It's not something new, but all of Boston has seen that in the last couple of years. So we're blessed to have him as our Chief Executive Officer, our mayor. But he brings passion and so many wonderful qualities to our city. That's what makes this city great. As he said, the people, absolutely. But it starts at the top of the leadership. I also want to just acknowledge the presence of Tish McMullen. Tish is with Beth Israel Deegan. She's had some serious illness the last several months. Life has been very unfair to her, but she has battled, and she's battled it very successfully. She's back. We missed her. Happy to see her back. She also happens to live in Dorchester, Ward 16, Mr. Mayor. You might want to just congratulate her. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Take a couple of pictures. And now the mayor is offered to spend a couple of minutes to have pictures taken. I too will stay if you're interested to have a picture.